Give it a second. Okay, welcome everyone. We are now back with another edition of Subvisual Live Talks. As always, send us questions, comments, anything you want to #Subvisual Talks or #Subvisual Live Talks on Twitter. Also, if you want to chat here on Twitch, that's also fine. We'll try to monitor those. And if you like this and want to know more, subscribe to Subvisual on any of these channels. We'll be sharing all the information there. So without further ado, welcome, Carlos.
Hey.
Hey. So Carlos, before we get going with anything else, do you want to just quickly give an introduction of who you are and what you've been doing?
Work as an author for Pluralsight, and I also do consult with Adopter Labs. Have been in the community for maybe 15 through open source, so various languages and tools and frameworks. And I currently live in Orlando, Florida, but I'm originally from Brazil.
Cool. So Carlos, the first question I always ask people is, how did you get started in tech? So what was the thing that got you started in tech in general, or in engineering, programming, whatever?
Yeah, so I got into tech, funny enough, through music. 14, 15 years old, I had my first experience with computers and internet. And as a teenager, the first thing that you want to do is find friends, meet people, hang out with people. Into music at the time, just getting into music and just getting to know the bands and shows, minded people.
Mm-hmm.
We really had to dig in and search for WAV files and spend your entire night downloading those and all that stuff. And then I naturally got into online forums. And how are they made? Like, how do you make a forum? How do you make a chat room? And one thing led to another, and then I started looking into ways to interact programmatically with forums and chat rooms. And that's how I wrote my first lines of code. And this was VB back in like 97. And then at the same time, I was play guitar, I was getting into bands, and those were like my two passions at the time. So it was music, bands, playing music, and then, but as a teenager, music was a little bit more interesting for me at the time. So programming got contract until I got into college. I went to college for computer science, and that's when programming to be my main thing, and it's been my my main thing since then. So
cool. It's funny that you mentioned that you obviously all that music connection, but also that you got into computer science in college. Was that something that you had planned for a long time, or was it on a whim? Like what made you decide to, well, first of all, go to college, because not everyone does, but also for a computer science degree?
yeah, no, it wasn't a whole lot of thought into it. I knew that I wanted to do something in the realm of science. So while I was doing like my last year of high school, or what would be high school in Brazil, I I considered doing like physics, math. know, so I was using technology, and then kind of a last minute, I remember this, I was actually talking how to use them. So from their perspective, I was good at it, which didn't mean anything. I didn't know anything about computer science. I had no idea what was sounded very challenging, and it was, and that's kind of what attracted me to it. And I think I just got lucky because I never looked back. I'm I'm happy I took that path. And yeah, so
Cool. And so then, so you said you started with Visual Basic, and then in college, like I'm assuming stuff like Java, maybe C Sharp is probably
yeah.
the stuff you got into. But at least I got to know you more from the Ruby world, which is probably something that was not taught in college. So, how did you transition from a more formal CS degree to other things that you've been doing?
Yeah, you're completely right. The hot thing at the time, and like a lot of people that I know, like a lot of my friends in college, I had a really again going back to what I was using every day. I remember going to forums. I found it a lot easier to do the things that I wanted to do, which was build web applications. So while in college, I was being taught Java, and I was asked to write Java. We were asked to write Java for a lot of our classes. I was actually learning whenever I could, and I would translate. But I knew that what I wanted to, the route that I wanted to take was the PHP route, so to web application from a developer's perspective. Was called
Hmm.
in the very south of the country, and I was hooked, man. Like I found the open source tools do things of everybody learning together, and not being secretive
Let's keep
about.
going. So you were saying that you got into Envy Labs a little bit before you got into code school, and that's was that how you got into the consultancy kind of work? Was it with Envy Labs?
Was the first consultancy I worked at, where I really learned Ruby on Rails and working with small multifunctional teams. Because I'd come from like big corporations, and I've been reading about agile, to do such thing in and then with the people and fast feedback. So yeah, environment. And then yeah, from ND Labs, Code School. So we launched Code School, and then I just naturally went into producing educational. And for a long time, I was doing both. I was spending half of my time doing consultancy work, and then the other half of my time teaching at Code School. And then with Code School growing, I just went into Code School full time, and that's kind of where I am today. Code School was acquired about maybe like 6 years ago by Pluralsight, and then that's the company that I work for producing content nowadays. So
Cool. And so let's we talked a bit about how you got into Ruby and Rails, some consultancy, and then um, kind of how Code School took off. So Code School was a project from Envy Labs, right? And I'm assuming not for a client. It's just something that you decided to create. Do you remember like what was the driver to start Code School?
yeah. So back in Envy Labs, because way before I joined, Greg was already known in the community, Greg Pollock, for teaching material, for teaching Ruby, for producing really high quality content material. And then when he started Envy Labs, we were constantly asked to go to conferences and run workshops, and we were doing a lot of that. And it was we found that the biggest obstacle in doing live workshops, especially back then, especially with Ruby on Rails, was getting it set up on everybody's computer, right? Getting Ruby installed, getting Rails installed, getting Ruby gems installed, installing whatever database we were using across different machines. There were people using Windows, Linux, Mac OS, whatever. And then we decided to try to replicate sort of a teaching environment in the browser. And so based on all the pain points that we've had running these workshops across the country and the world for a few years, and that's when we launched our first sort of MVP, which was Rails for Zombies. So that was one course, just a single course, teaching the beginning. It was a very intro to Rails, to Ruby on Rails. And then people would just access the website from whatever operating system they were on. Everything was in the browser. They didn't have to install anything. They could run the commands. We had exercises, interactive exercises in the course. And then we would teach on video, and then we would have the exercises on a text editor embedded inside of the browser. And then we would students would submit the code to our servers, would evaluate in real time, and then respond with whether the exercise was correct or not. And that really took off. We had no idea it would reach so many people as it did. So it kind of validated the assumption that we had. So given that response, we decided to invest in more content of that type. And that then we launched our second course, which I believe at the time was a jQuery course, following the same kind of format. In the browser, people didn't have to install anything. Short videos followed by interactive exercises. And then after we had a few of those, we wrapped them all into Code School. So we kind of grouped them all into courses inside of a coding school, coding platform for learning to code. And then that's when we launched Code School, and that kind of became our main focus for a few of us that were working at the consultancy at the time. So that's kind of how Code School grew, and I feel like it was very organic, right? Like we didn't plan to launch Code School; we planned to launch an interactive experience, and then based on the feedback that we had from that one Rails for Zombies course, we decided to invest more resources in creating more of that material, and that allowed us to reach more people in a more efficient manner than doing workshops and conferences. So we actually for a little bit of time we actually ran those workshops in conferences. So we actually allowed people access to our platform from the conference. And then instead of watching videos, we would teach the content in person. But when the time came to do it, the exercises, people didn't have to set up anything. They could just do the exercises that were part of the course in the website. So
yeah, a couple things there. I remember that time pretty well. It was basically when I was starting to learn Ruby and Rails. That's when Code School was coming up. And one thing I distinctly remember from Code School, even at that time where the web was a bit different, was it looked really nice. I think they had a really good image. All these like different themes for the different courses, but even then, like the whole thing was really nicely put together. And I was wondering because you're basically it was a web product consultancy. How did it like? I'm assuming there was a lot of video editing that had to start happening, and a lot like how did you guys learn about that? Is something that you outsourced, or how did that happen?
oh yeah. Right from the get go, we worked with a video producer, really
Mm,
good friend of mine, Oliver Tosh, and yeah, all the video production was his thing. That being said, Greg, who's the visionary, the founder of the
mhm.
company, like he has a theater background,
Yeah.
right? So he's pretty natural in front of the camera, performing, presenting, and then he had been doing those kind of videos for a long time before Code School came about. So he already had kind of like the process in place for doing the kind of videos. Uh, Kind of like the missing part was the interactive portion,
Yeah.
right? So that's what Code School brought to the table, was putting together the video content that Greg had already been producing for the past couple of years with actual in browser practice. So
How hard was that to like because you're basically creating a sandbox for people to
yeah,
work with that needs to be sufficiently powerful that they can learn, but
yeah,
also you can't give them full access to everything. Obviously, like
yeah.
how hard was to build to build that. First of all, because of the security issues, but also of all the interactiveness that it has um, in a web that was pre all these new fancy interactive libraries.
Yeah. It was hard, man. It was as hard as you can possibly imagine. Like that was the biggest, thing, right? And we weren't perfect from the get go, right? We ran into a lot of issues until we kind of perfected the process. And like you said, like this was pre Docker. Like Docker solves like 99% of the issues, the security issues that we had back then, right? So yeah, it was a good challenge. It was a good challenge. One of our co-founders, Eric Allen, he actually was the one that did most of the work on that front. So he was the one that pretty much built the first like the Rails for Zombies from the ground up, the back end of that stuff. So yeah, I remember him running into all sorts of issues. Like every time he would release like a test version for us internally, someone from the company would be able to find a security breach and bring the thing down. But after a few iterations, we got it to work. So yeah,
Was it also built on Rails? The first,
he
I
was built on
I don't
Rails.
know
Oh
if it
yeah,
still
oh yeah.
is. Probably not.
I mean, it's not online anymore, I
Hmm.
believe.
No,
But
I
yeah, it
mean,
was all.
oh yeah, because so that's also a good question. So when you transitioned, when Code School was acquired by Pluralsight, you transitioned all the old stuff into the Pluralsight website and platform, or like is any of the Code School stuff still going on?
So the under the Code School domain, it's not.
Hmm.
We actually have a few videos up on YouTube. If anybody wants to like remember those times, they can just look up Code School on YouTube. We have a few of the jingles which you mentioned, so they're really fun to watch. Uh, so the codeschool.com website was taken down. It's offline. We did port some of our courses over to Pluralsight, the video portion, and then we also have some interactive courses that we have in our in
Hmm.
on Pluralsight, right? following along the same lines that we did for code school. So coding in the browser, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
yeah.
That reminded me of something that is probably an issue that you face a lot in creating content, especially teaching educational content in this ever-changing technology world is how often do you feel like that something you put out there is outdated and you need to redo it or relaunch it in a different way?
That's a really good question. And my answer to that is, it's not as much as we think. And the reason why I say that is because, uh, you know, there's a lot of people that can't move as fast as they would like in terms of technology, right? For those of us that are always in the cutting edge, we kind of forget that not a lot of people have the freedom to always be on the latest version of the framework or always be using the latest tool that comes out, right? So in terms of being deprecated or being like old, like I don't worry too much because you can just say, hey, this is a course on Rails, for example, like version 4, right?
Hmm.
Like if you're using a version that's newer than that, it's probably not going to work for you. But if you're looking for stuff related to Rails version 4, like this is still going to work for you, right? So I don't worry too much about that because I try to make it very clear on our courses on Pluralsight or whenever I release some sort of educational material, like this is good for these versions, right? And there's always going to be people working with older versions of software with legacy stuff,
Hmm.
right? So yeah.
Is there a focus, or maybe don't even think about that, but is there um, a distinction between doing a course on a particular technology version, whatever, or a more generic concept that might be longer lasting? Is that something that you think about when planning, like what to teach next?
Uh, that's a good question. That's a good question. So a lot of our so the way that we produce content in Pluralsight is a little bit different than we do at Code School. Like our clients are different. Our end user is a little bit different,
Hmm.
right? So a lot of the users from Code School were like startups, right? Or were individual developers learning to code
Hmm.
on their own, right? Our target audience for Pluralsight is a lot of the people like it includes those people for sure. But I feel like most of our audience is people that are already part of the company, and then they already have sort of a path they need to learn, uh, uh, uh,
Hmm.
uh, a specific technology. So it's a little bit in that sense, it's a little bit easier to find out what they need to learn and then produce that content for them, as opposed to always having to teach the latest technology for the people that are just starting right now.
Right.
Right. But now going back to your question, there's always stuff that never gets sold, like good practices
Hmm.
that we can always recycle and teach it. For example, like testing, right? Like I don't think testing will ever be uh, should ever be forgotten, right? There's always room for creating a testing course on or testing material, educational material for whatever technology is the hot technology at the time, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, I think there's a balance between those two. There's always going to be the specific stuff that you need to teach, but there's always this stuff that lives across technology generations, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Um, Yeah, you mentioned there a balance, and I was asking because you also mentioned previously that you have a consultancy where you also do some consultants like work on actual products, and how hard it is to strike a balance between teaching and actually doing the stuff that you're trying to teach, uh, and so that you're not outdated or like just not making sense as a teacher anymore.
Yeah. So I think I'm lucky that I get to teach the stuff that I work with. Uh, so I'm and so they complement each other, right? So it's one thing feeds into another. I'll either start using some sort of technology on a client project, and then I'll happen to teach that technology, or I'll learn a technology to teach, and then it will be useful on a project that I'm working on, right? So in that sense, it actually works in my favor, right? That I'm always working with technologies that I'm excited about, and that either that I'm using, or I'm pretty sure that it's going to be useful for me at some point, right?
Hmm.
So
Um, and still in this educational space, how do you feel? And it's good that you have a background of computer science in college. How do you feel about maybe just in computer science or in general, but uh, more formal educations in like colleges versus the online education, which has been growing a lot in the last few years?
yeah, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think there's still value in going to college. I certainly appreciate having the chance to go to college. I would not have traded that for anything. That's where I met my best friends, my business partners. Uh, so if anything, that's where you get exposed to potentially the network that you're going to have for the rest of your life, right? So the people that you learned with, right? Uh, and I also learned a lot in college. Uh, it challenged me to learn things. I think that challenge, by itself is already exercising you for the industry.
Hmm.
Now, there's a lot of people that might be needing to learn or wanting to learn how to code later in life, and they just don't have the time or the resources to go into like a 4 year computer science program. They just want to learn how to code, right? And deep, a much more efficient way to do that it is to do a shorter, more focused kind of learning, either through an online school or in-person boot camp of some sort, and not going through the formal means of education, right? But I think there's value in both, and there's a lot of people that actually do the first, and they find that they actually enjoy the science behind software development, and they actually go into formal education after that, right? So I think there's still value in it, and they to some extent they complement each other, right?
I don't know if in your learning or no, sorry, in your teaching experience, you've been involved in any hiring processes, but do you think that the hiring is kind of open equally to people that coming from those two backgrounds right now in computer science or in technology?
Yeah, I think it is open equally. For the hiring that I've been part of, we don't necessarily look. We haven't looked at where people came from. It's more of a matter of like, what can you do? What are you passionate about? What have you done, that you can show us? And
Hmm.
what do you want to do? Right? Like, it doesn't matter where you learned what you know. It only matters to us, how passionate you are about it, where what kind of technologies you want to work with, and what kind of things you know how to do, whether you learned that from a formal education or from an online course. It doesn't really matter, right? What matters is, can you sit with another developer? Can you pair program together with them? Can you make suggestions? Can you work in a group, right? Can you work in a team? Can you be part of a team? I think that's probably one of the most important things nowadays, right?
Hmm.
Is can you take criticism? Can you make suggestions in a polite manner? Can you work as part of yeah, as part of a team in with the goal, right? And so I think that's more important than which school you went to. And I do think, at least for the situations that I've been involved with, the background where people learn what they know wasn't really relevant for the situation in question.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I just sometimes I think there's still some biases in both people that are part of the the people interviewing, but also in the process itself. It's sometimes kind of biased towards people coming from a more formal CS background. Um,
I mean, that's not the only problem with interviewing in general. Like, there's so many things that we can talk about, like in the interviewing process for tech companies.
mhm.
That
There's a lot of stuff.
the that one is just, yeah,
It's not, yeah, but it's hard to. It's a process that involves people, and every
yeah,
process that involves people, I think, can never be perfect. So, um,
yeah.
cool. Last question I think I have in terms of the education part of this talk is what are you doing right now? Like, what topics are you covering right now for Pluralsight that for courses that you're excited about?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of cloud stuff, in particular AWS.
Hmm.
So we're working with a new product later that should be launching later in the year. That's going to involve a lot of hands-on cloud stuff, and I've been producing a lot of that some of that material, and it's been really exciting getting to know cloud technologies a little bit deeper, a little bit closer. So
Yeah, so it's a course on AWS, like using AWS, or is just that's just a
yeah,
stepping stone for okay, because
no,
AWS
it
is
is,
very complex in itself, right? It has a bunch of
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. So it's many different labs covering individual AWS services. So how to do different things in AWS, how to use Lambda, how to use API Gateway, how to use API Gateway with Lambda and DynamoDB, so that kind of thing. So it's been really fun putting together some of that material, and then yeah, hopefully soon we're going to be able to launch that, and then have people go through and take the labs, and actually they get to like do that all that in the browser in a sandbox. So
You're able to encapsulate like using AWS in the browser. That's pretty cool. Or how does that work?
well, not in the browser. So we talk to
I mean,
AWS, right?
okay,
Yeah.
got it, got it, got it.
Yeah.
But you still you
So
can run the commands there. I'm assuming, and
yeah, yeah.
cool.
So
Is
yeah,
that
so I think the whole so sorry, just to compliment, I think the whole point behind, some of the stuff that I do when I talk interactive is to the goal is to show people that are not familiar with that particular technology what it is to work with that technology, right? So what's cool about working with, with AWS? What's cool about working with API Gateway, right? So we don't expect in one single course, in one single lab, we don't expect to teach people everything there is to know about that specific technology, right? What we want to do is we want to show them where that technology really shines, and we want to get them excited about that technology and leave it up to them to decide whether or not they want to continue
mhm.
researching and learning about that technology, depending on whether that solves, well, one of their problems, that they might have, right? So we kind of want to highlight what it is. We want to give them the experience of what it is to work with that technology, so they can go ahead and continue the education.
So what's the process like of preparing such a course? Is something that I'm assuming you have to study for, probably. But how do you then like outline everything and prepare like all of that? Is just yours,
Yeah.
or is there's a team that prepares that?
Yeah, no, there is a team. Yeah, there's a team for sure, for sure. There's maybe like a dozen people internally that we're working with, and then there's also Pluralsight works with most of our authors. The vast majority is external authors,
Mm,
right? So we reach out to subject matter experts in the software developer community, and then they produce content for the platform. And then we have very few authors in house that kind of help the product team explore, kind of like pave the way for the external authors to have a better experience. So the process is pretty much what you said. Like, there's starting with the technology that we know we want to teach,
mm,
We dive into that technology. We kind of learn how to use it, and not only how to use it, but why to use it. And then we put together a few applications using that technology, resembling as much as possible like a real world application, right? We try to avoid the really contrived examples,
Hmm.
right? So that's why we invest the time to really understand where each technology is better suited to be used. And then based on that experience, we put together the educational material showing people how to use it and then
That
why
that
to use it.
that sounds time consuming though. Like how long
It is.
does it take you for like to record like from you know what you want to do to like having it done? Um, do you have
It
a
really depends. Yeah, it really depends on the technology and on the, like how familiar each one of us authors is with. It's happened that I've had to teach technology that I've been using it for many years, so that was really easy and really fast compared to teaching something that I had only heard about. So I'd have to take a couple of weeks to learn and then build something. So anywhere between 2 weeks to 3 months, depending on
okay?
what type of educational material, because we have different types, right?
Yeah,
We have courses, we have labs, we have projects. So it really depends on
yeah,
what kind of medium we're using to teach. So,
got it.
and it's not again, like the authoring portion is just a fraction of the work that's done, right? There's an entire developer team that puts together the back end
Right.
to
Yeah.
do whatever needs to be done for that medium, right? So if it's an interactive course, they need to evaluate the code. If it's a project, they need to receive the source code and also evaluate it in respectively. So yeah, there's a lot more people other than authors working on a specific content. So
Got it. Cool. Changing gears a little bit, I want to talk about iDoctor Labs.
yeah,
So can you briefly say like or describe like what you guys do over there?
yeah. So we're a consultancy. Our 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 mission is to we're against the abandonment of good ideas, right? So if our clients have a good idea, we want to try and validate that idea somehow. And so this is a good an interesting change from the teaching role that I have, because teaching, you teach technology for the sake of technology, right? So if I know, for example, that I have to teach AWS, DynamoDB, I'm not going to question whether Dynamo is a good option for whatever the problem is. Like, I have to teach Dynamo. Here's how Dynamo works, right? But when we're talking about client work, then we have to understand what the problem is and what kind of solutions we have in hand to solve that problem in the most efficient and timely manner, right? And that's all we do. We have our preferences as far as like technology stack. We use Elixir, we use Phoenix, we use React, and more recently we have a few React Native projects in the mobile realm of things too. So yeah, it's really fun. It's a small shop. Going back to my consultancy years, it's been fun working close with clients. Fast-paced environment, small teams. Multifunctional. So
Cool. You mentioned there the tech stack, Phoenix and Elixir and React and all of those. What's your take, or have you been experimenting with Live View as an alternative maybe to React? Is something that you've been trying or not really?
yes, funny enough, I recently, a couple days ago, I started the Pragmatic Studio
Mm-hmm.
live view course.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm really interested in learning, in figuring out how to best use it in our projects, because I would much prefer to stay within a single stack, right? Than to write different projects for client side and then backend if I don't have to, right? So if I could stay within the same stack, within the same technology, everything running on the beam, and just leveraging the power of the Elixir VM,
Hmm.
then that's definitely something that I want to do. So yeah, I'm interested. Have you tried it?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We've used
Yeah.
it. Well, I've used it in a few projects. I used it in a couple in production. It's pretty interesting technology. I
Yeah.
like it a lot, but um, there's a bunch of reasons why I like it. I think, as you're saying, like it gets rid of a bunch of front end code, which I personally have never been a fan of. I know some people disagree, even internally here at Subvisual, but it's something that I like, that it takes that, like all of that, and makes it a bit simpler, and you can use live view. That's another cool thing, where you can use like live view for the entire thing, or you can use live view for a small section of your page, and the
Yeah.
rest can just be regular server rendered, without the interactivity. So it's kind of, you can do there what you want, and obviously then you have all the control that you already had from Elixir. So I don't know. I think that that's interesting. There's some drawbacks, obviously. You're it makes it harder to do like offline stuff, or
Mm.
maybe even impossible because the whole thing is happening on like connecting to the server, and stuff like that. But it's not something that like I've usually had to deal with too much. I don't know if it's the case for you, but for the regular website where people are online using it, latency is usually pretty good. Can be an issue, like if people are very far away from where you're serving your code from, you may encounter latency issues. Haven't seen those too much yet. Anyway, I'm yeah, very pumped about that. Well, Elixir in general, but I was gonna go into that a little bit more. What made you go from Ruby to Elixir, and what made you stay as well?
Yeah. So good question. I think was so when I started looking into Elixir, I wasn't doing programming full time anymore, right? I wasn't doing consultancy anymore. I was full time at code school. I was writing some side projects here and there, but I wasn't like actively working on client projects, right? But I did wish that Ruby ran a little bit faster, right? Especially in terms of testing, right? And I'm a
Mm,
huge fan of TDD. And that's something that I felt was a little bit slow, like testing first, having like auto tests running all the time in Rails. With bigger projects, that would take a lot of time, right? And then when I tried, Elixir, well, first when I tried Elixir, I was just looking for a change of paradigm. I had never worked with a functional language before, so I was looking for that challenge. I was trying to understand like what can this bring to me, and how is using a functional language going to change how I think about programs, right? And I fell in love with that. I was like, this is amazing. This is really good. And I heard someone say, and this really resonated with me. Like pattern matching is like one of those things when you learn, you're gonna wish that every other language had
yeah,
it.
for sure.
So yeah, so that was one of the many things that I immediately fell in love with in Elixir. And then I started playing around with Phoenix, and the speed was just surprising. Right, running tests was just fractions of a second, and then as the application grew, we have like a really big application now, and running tests takes like 3 seconds. Right, it's insane.
Hmm.
Right, with all the database connections and doing all the queries, like not mocking anything, just like full on
Yeah,
test suite takes like 2.5 3 seconds. So that's what kind of like made me stay, was the speed of not the speed that necessarily the not the performance of the app itself, but the speed that the stack allowed me to write code with, right? So yeah.
yeah, but well, the performance, I'm sure you also realize like that the more it's way more constant memory wise, like
Yeah.
not a lot of issues. But um, do you see, is there any drawbacks that you see compared to Rails?
Uh,
Well, I'm
So that's the
comparing, sorry, just to clarify, I'm comparing Phoenix to Rails, not Elixir
right,
to
right,
Rails.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I have had way more time with Rails than I have now with Phoenix. I don't consider myself as proficient with Phoenix as I used to be with Rails. So there's still a lot of things that I need to get accustomed with and do it like the Elixir or the Phoenix style, right? One like the first one that I can think of that I still haven't got over with is just queries, right? Like
Yeah, I
I
was
was
gonna
so
say
used to
Ecto.
active record. Yeah, active record was just natural to me, right? All the relationships, all the queries, how they should be written for better performance, where they should be placed. And now with Ecto, like everything is different. Not everything, but a lot of things are different, and you have to
Hmm.
get used to it until it feels just natural to write. Like sometimes I still need to go back to the docs and read it and look at open source code and see how people are using it to figure out why it's not behaving as I expect it to behave. Uh, but uh, but it pays off in the long run. It pays off. So yeah, that's the
Yeah.
one thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the Ecto model makes sense, but it always trips me as well. And I've been doing it for
Yeah,
like 4 years now, and I
yeah,
always forget the syntax. But um, what about because one thing going back and forth between Rails and Phoenix for me, one thing that I find is Rails still has a much bigger community. Well, first of all, it's a bigger framework, way more powerful than Phoenix in the sense that it has a lot more features built in. Um, that's good and bad, but also there's a lot more libraries and a bigger ecosystem, more resources in general. Uh, do you feel that that's just something that is a drawback right now, maybe because Phoenix will evolve into that, or you don't see that at all?
yeah. I think it's like the community will catch up. Like it's hard to compete in that sense. Size of community with a framework that's been around for as long as Rails has been around. uh, and I think the ecosystem will catch up. Like I'm sure we'll solve all the major issues that we have. I do wish that we don't overuse dependencies like we did with Rails, where and kind of like what we did with like jQuery and JavaScript. Like back in the day, everything was a jQuery plugin, right? And same thing with Rails. Like, oh, just install this gem and you're gonna get what you need to do. Like, wait, do I really need to add another dependency? Like, do I need a gem to do this, or can I just do this with like 4 lines of code? So I believe that the Elixir and the Phoenix community is starting out, or at least when it did start out, with uh, with a head start in terms of maturity and knowing what to avoid, the mistakes to avoid, right, from the Rails years, but also from much longer Erlang years, right? And
Hmm.
I think that's what's really beautiful about the Elixir community is that we're getting the new blood, right, to sit down with extremely smart and experienced people that have been doing this for 30 years in Erlang, and we're merging the ideas, right, and then we're learning from each other, right. And again, I don't think, and this is a fact just because Elixir was created by José Valim, which was from the Ruby and Rails community. So
Hmm.
it's pretty evident to me that Elixir and Phoenix wouldn't even exist hadn't it been for Rails and
For
Ruby,
sure, for
right.
sure, yeah.
And I think not only that, I think the web development community wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for Rails. Like, I am not sure that I would like to be part of a community where Rails wouldn't have existed
Hmm.
to pave the way for all the various frameworks that we have today, right? And I think I will forever be grateful for Rails, the framework, and the community to agree on the conventions and the practices that we have for web development in general, that all the different frameworks and tools are still to this day being inspired by. So
Cool. We're getting to the time, but I don't know because all of the issues that we had. If you have a few more minutes, I have
Yeah.
just a couple more questions. Cool. So, where we, as we've already mentioned, where we originally met was at the conference, and well, right now conferences are not really happening, at least not as they used to. I don't know. Have you been to any Elixir conferences,
Well,
or
in the
do you
past,
plan
yeah,
to?
I did. Yeah, well, I attended the one that we had here in Orlando
Hmm.
a couple years ago, maybe like 3 years ago,
Yeah,
four
that
years
was
ago, something like that.
Elixir Conf, right?
Elixir Conf, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
How how do you compare then? Because you've been to a bunch of Ruby conferences, and even from that small sample size, how do you compare the conference like vibe from the Ruby versus Elixir community?
It was very similar, man. Like in the sense of excitement,
Hmm.
right? People excited with what's to come, with the possibilities. Seeing the incredibly powerful technology that we have available for us, right? And you know, in all the different side projects and all the different applications, like the Nerves projects, right, that uses Elixir in embedded systems. We had a Nerves workshop, we had a Phoenix workshop, we had a bunch of different talks. So it was really exciting, and it reminded me of the early Rails days,
Hmm.
the excitement of what's to come, right? So yeah, and I also attended. Sorry, I actually attended two more. I attended Elixir Days
Hmm.
in St. Augustine, and then the following year, I attended Elixir Days in Denver, Colorado. But this was a much, much, much smaller conference. Still very exciting. Still very exciting. So,
Cool. And do you plan to speak at any of these conferences if they come back soon? But do you plan?
oh, if they come, yeah, if they come back, I know absolutely, absolutely. I haven't yet done any like remote
Hmm.
conference. I don't know. I've also been like pretty bad since like COVID with doing just remote stuff in general. For the past 5 years, I've organized the Orlando JavaScript user group with monthly meetups in person, right? So since the whole lockdown started, I haven't really been doing anything online. I don't know. I haven't been as excited about online meetups as I am about in-person meetups, and I feel like if I wanted to force it right now, you wouldn't be authentic.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't be doing justice to the people attending and then to the speaker. So I'd rather like put it on a pause. But hopefully this is going to change soon. So either we're going to go back to doing it in person, or I'm going to just suck it up and just do it online. So
Have you tried any online conferences, either attending or speaking at any online event before, even pre-COVID?
uh, yeah, I've done it before. I've done it before. Yeah, it's okay if we need to, and I've only done it because it was something out of town or out of the country,
Hmm.
right? But if I can be there in person, then
Yeah.
I would absolutely prefer to do that.
Yeah, totally agree. We've been having those issues as well with trying to set up conferences or the meetups that we host, and it's definitely a challenge. But it's something that I think we're gonna have to embrace sooner or later because I don't think we'll be 100% back to where we were before anytime soon. So
Yeah, yeah. I think because just to complement that, because to me the biggest challenge is that there is of course value in the presentation and the talk and learning, and watching a presenter teach. But how about the hallway
yeah, yeah.
track, right? How about talking to people
Yeah.
in between talks, right?
I think that's
And I had a really good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just gonna say that for the communities that I know the best, like Elixir and Ruby communities, that's really what matters mostly to most people that go to those conferences is to get to know each other and talk and hang out after. Like that's what it's really about, I think.
Yeah.
Um, cool. Carlos, I think in terms of the stuff that I wanted to cover, I think we talked about everything, but is there anything that you want to talk about?
No, I think we had a really good conversation, man. Thanks for the invite. So always happy to sync up. It's been a while since we last met, so
Yeah,
hopefully that changes
yeah,
soon.
for sure. And thank you very much for being here, and we'll talk some other time.
Yep. See you, man.
Bye. Okay, everyone. So this was another edition of Subvisual Live Talks with some technical issues in between, but I think we made it through all right. And again, if you want to keep watching and know more about what's happening with both Subvisual Live Talks and Subvisual in general, subscribe to any of these channels and share them with whoever you see fit. See you guys next week. Goodbye.